Welcome back everyone. We can get started with our lightning session 2. So for lightning session 2, we have Dr. Aakrit Joshi and Dr. Keshav Bhattarai as the moderators. So I'm going to pass it to both of them. I'm not sure if Dr. Bhattarai has joined yet, but I think Aakrit is here.
I'm here.
Oh, sorry, Dr. Bhattarai. I was looking for you and I couldn't find
that's fine. I was stealing your name.
Thank you. So, okay. I will hand it over to you both.
Thank you. Welcome to the lightning session 2. So we have 7 presenters according to the list, but I could see only 2 presenters here. If there are only 2 presenters, and each of you would get 20 minutes. And so let's start it. Let's start with Trishita.
Hi everyone. Good morning.
The floor is yours now. And then rigid norms to food profit. Change in traditional culinary practices, exploring the lived experience of Karbi women or brewers.
Hello everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
I'm just sharing my screen. Good morning and good evening to everyone. My paper title, Rigid Norms to Food Profits, Changes in Traditional Culinary Practices, Exploring the Lived Experiences of Karbi Women of Hor Brewers. So Hor is a traditional alcoholic beverage that is a very pertinent beverage in Karbi indigenous communities culinary practices. So Karbi indigenous community is, according to the India Census of India 2011, it is the 3rd largest indigenous community in Assam. Along with the population in Assam, there are Karbi communities living in other states of India, like Nagaland, and as well as in some of the parts in Bangladesh also. As Michael Dater also argues that the fluidity that alcohol brings, it actually metaphorically describes many civilizations' political, cultural, household economics, and larger of the structures of this kind of entities. Hor also holds a very prominent place in Karbi society's ritual, political, cultural practices as a symbolic medium, which used in cultural practices starting from the birth related rituals to marriage, as well as in the death ritual. It plays a very pertinent role. And at the same time, when it comes to the traditional administrative structure, in those institutional space also, Hor plays a very important role in terms of political conversations and in terms of putting cultural, political status in society. Having said that, I would like to also say is that this particular paper is actually one of the chapter that I'm trying to build up from my MPhil study, but it was not particularly a pertinent topic initially. So it was mid of August 2021, the lockdown imposed during the second wave of COVID-19 in Assam has been just lifted. And I was in that moment when I was finally begun my MPhil field work after long hauls of being stuck at home situation. My MPhil research project explores the entangled realities of landscape, gender, indigenous knowledge practices in the context of Karbi women residing in the rural areas of Karbi Anglong and West Karbi Anglong hill districts of Assam. And the Bohara Kaziranga landscape, which is one of the pertinent landscape in Karbi Anglong hill districts, was one of my first field site. As mentioned, so understanding the everyday experiences of Karbi women while navigating their landscape and while participating in agricultural practices and other aspects is one of my core inquiry or objective of my MPhil research. So
Trishita,
in
your
that context,
slide is not moving. Your slide is not moving.
Is it moving now?
Now it is, yeah.
Yeah, I've talked about the particular importance in Karbi societies about the war. I'm in the 5th slide, talking about the context of my MPhil research. And so, while having said that, focusing on the traditional alcoholic beverages was not the particular scope of my study initially. But every conversation that I had with Karbi women, it's actually it's intertwined with their sharing about the daily labor of brewing alcoholic beverages. And indeed, the conversation among women about the alcoholic beverages, more specifically about her, have set the ground for unpacking lots of aspects of rigid normative social facts and the changing circumstances amidst diverse social, economic, and ecological changes in the landscape. So alcoholic beverage as a particularly culinary practices come under the category where materiality of the substance plays a very important signifier in their society. So thereby it becomes a part of my MPhil studies. So having said that, the story that I'm gonna share is comes from an ethnographic account where which also include individual semi-structure level interaction with women, and as well as group discussions, and as well as visiting horse selling marketplaces and observing the horse preparation processes and etc. And my participants are primarily Karbi women residing in 6 villages, 3 in Karbi Anglong district and 3 in West Karbi Anglong district. And the age group is mostly in between 20 to 60 years of age. But along with that, I have interacted with village head and male whore brewer and seller in very limited numbers. Talking about the landscape more precisely, so the Karbi Anglong hill district is like 2 hill districts. Karbi Anglong and West Karbi Anglong comes under the Karbi Anglong Autonomous Council, which actually comes under the 6th schedule of the Constitution of India, which provides them certain kind of autonomy of administration and other policy legal level autonomy in terms of legal decision making. And at the same time, if we see the larger connectivity in the geographical location, Karbi Anglong is actually connected at one side with the Meghalaya Plateau, the East Khasi Hills area, and on the other side, as I've already mentioned, in the Golaghat area, the Kaziranga National Park is situated. So it has a very fluid sort of geographical connectivity in when we see the East Karbi Anglong, that is the Karbi Anglong district area. And along with that, in one side of the district is also connect with the Jayantia Hill and Dima Hasao, which is also another hill district of Assam, and which actually further connected to with the landscape of Nagaland and Myanmar. So this connectivity is the geographical connectivity actually also been shared with lots of historical and political commonality. So there were in the similar time there was a autonomy movement that happened initially in a combined way along across this state, and then how it divided, and at the same time there are lots of cultural sharing that happen in across this border state borders. uh, Having said that, now when we look at the role of women in terms of alcoholic beverage production, it is connected with their mythical folklore also. So the folklore Thap Keplang alone, which actually narrates the originality of this alcoholic beverage, and which, according to the narration, it is that the sky god which actually introduced this whore or this alcohol to the Karbi people, and this introduction comes as a form of a dream, and which was dreamt by two women. So that set a particular normative uh, role of role that women play in terms of whore brewing, and it continues even today. So there are certain kind of social norms that is being followed, that it customarily it is only being practiced or prepared by the married women, and men are not customarily are not actually allowed to even touch the ingredients that is being used, as well as the utensil that is used for whore preparation. And there are certain, like for example, that horso, which is actually a very ritualistically important alcoholic beverage, which can be made uh, before taking bath. So those are the strict rigid norms that is customarily been there. But we will see how there is a fluidity happen in terms of changing of the time and economic increasing of the changing of the economic structures also. So this particular whore making process is evidently a indigenous knowledge practice, which actually been shared over generation and generations mostly among women. But among my participants, there are variations in terms of when and at what age women started adopting this kind of skill of brewing. But mostly it is evident that from the childhood onwards, they started picking up this kind of technique, skill of brewing. So, one of my respondent was sharing, and I quote, "As soon as I was able to do grinding in my childhood and picking up the grinding stick, I started learning doing brewing and making the yeast cake. I saw my mother doing it, and I observed it, and I learned." Um, but at the same time, there are variations. Say, for example, one of my participants was saying that in her family was more concerned about her studies, so they were not allowing her to even engage in any sort of way while making the brewing. So she said, "In my childhood, my parents did not teach me whore making. They did not want me to get familiar with the intoxicating beverages at the younger age. They used to give emphasis on my studies. However, much later, when I got married and came to my husband's place, I had to learn about the process of preparing whore from my mother-in-law. My husband's house, the whore consumed regularly. So I had to learn the skill to prepare it. It is an exhausting process. After cooking and preparing it for hours, its peculiar aroma gets to you, and it automatically feel intoxicated without even consuming it. On the days when I prepare her, at the end of the process, I feel exhausted, and I had to take a break for the whole day and take rest. So this shows that there are variation in terms of understand and picking up the skill and etc. But at the same time, once they pick up, it becomes a very crucial part of women's day-to-day routine in terms of their gendered division of labor. And this exclusive role of women and the sharing of this knowledge actually also related with women's sort of a the gendered indigenous knowledge practices and their epistemic privilege of sort, because they are the one who is keeping that knowledge for generation. But if we look at the description in terms of if we look at the ethnobotanical writing of her or other alcoholic beverages among the indigenous practice communities, the role of women are mostly invisibilized in those kind of a literature. But interestingly, also, when as I mentioned about the folklore, uh, customarily the folk song attached to this folklore is also not being allowed to sung by women. It's only being sung by men customarily. So you can see the gatekeeping that happened in the patriarchal structure of, in some sort. In the detailing of in terms of, if we see the detailing in terms of the role, when it started with women engaging in the slash and burn cultivation as well as wet paddy cultivation, from where the local rice comes in, and it is a pertinent ingredient in the horror making process. And along with that, the yeast cake that is being made with the rice flour as well as some forested available herbs, that is marthu and bakkesu. These are the herbs which actually also foraged by women from the forest areas. And there are mainly two hor which is regularly being made: hor arak, which is a distilled alcohol, and the preparation of it actually takes a lot of time, because a lot of time, and and the second one is the hor lang, which is the rice beer. And according to the participant, it takes lesser time because they don't have to monitor again and again in terms of the preparation process. And when we see the consumption, the practices of consumption of alcohol, particularly the hor, it is actually being practiced till now only by the one who will still believe the indigenous faith. That is, in Karbi, it's called Honghari. So they are the Honghari women are the one who actually prepare hor regularly, and among the Honghari families and the villagers, hor is used still now in very prominently in every ritual and every function. But at the same, when women plays a pertinent role in making this a very important alcoholic beverage, they're actually on the hindsight, they are actually not allowed to even drink it alongside men. And during festival, usually women group together in a very peripheral area where they usually have some of the have some amount of hor. But as shared by the participant, it's heavy drinking by the women are always considered as a very bad sign of a character of the women. Along with that, the changes in terms of the perception of the hor, the fluidity from important social substance to taboo also happen with the process of conversion to Christianity, as well as more Sanskritized version of local faith like Lokhimon. Uh, uh, among this between in these two faith, horror preparation and consumption is considered as a taboo. But having said that, there is a variation that I've noticed in the field area. Say, for example, when I was interviewing some of the people who actually are Christian believer, but then particularly come from a higher class land holding group, even if it's a taboo, but it's the rigidity is not there in terms of following them. They can easily consume it. But when it comes to formally giving opinion about horror and horror making, among this believer, they always shared that it's kind of like a bad habit, and it's like a sign of showing that it's like a primitive practice that people are still practicing. Having said these variations of opinion, but another thing that is also been noticed and come up in interaction in the field area is that alcohol consumption and the quarrel at home is very prominent among the families sell whore and prepare it regularly, and it actually hampers children's education, as villages were sharing. But having said that, the whole the pressure or the regular preparation of whore actually is a very relatively new practice, because initially, according to the customary rule, it is only been prepared during festivals or during certain rituals, but it becomes a regular practice when the commercialization is attached to it. And the commercialization of the whore preparation is actually linked with with various other factors. Say, for example, they're reducing with the policies like June rehabilitation policy, which came long back, but then it actually shuffled a lots of agricultural based practices, and the community based land holding is now increasingly becoming privatized, and introduction of cash crop, etc., actually bring a precarity in terms of for the marginalized section who doesn't hold land holding. For them, there is a reduction of agricultural land where they can do slash and burn cultivation or wet cultivation, and at the same time, the privatization. Yes.
Hello, Trishita. So I'm just going to intrude. Sorry for the intrusion. You can take about 2 more minutes to wrap up the presentation.
Sure. Yeah. So basically, those are the factors which actually linked with the commercialization of whore that has happened, and with the commercialization, what happened, that the rigidity that was there, that it was only a practice being done by women, is now actually fluid in a sense that men also started participating in it, because the cash is a new addition to this preparation. So, and with that, the decision-making part is also going to the men's domain. Say, for example, Rohingya is a very important annual festival. Along with that, there is an annual meeting that happen in villages, where they decide on lots of things like prices of pork that they will sell from the village, and along with that, they also decide upon the prices of whore on which they will sell to the market. And this is a meeting which presided by the village head, which is male, and attended by the male heads from each families. So you can see the shrinking of the space for women in the decision making with the coming of the participation of men in this particular process. And along with men, the younger generations, young women has also started participating in selling whore, as well as selling yeast cake, etc. And and another thing that has been noticed is that earlier what happened, in the household where the whore are sold, people come and consume it and go. Now there is a retailer chain that comes in, where the non-Karbi people started buying it and selling it in other areas. And especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the other alcohol shops were closed, it is one of the beverage that is being uh, very much into the demand, and people started coming in from the other towns, etc., to the villages to buy whore in a way. In conclusion, what I was it's very it's kind of like a very preliminary stage, as I've sharing this from the field notes, etc. But what I was going at is that there is the whole alcohol preparation as a regular task for women is actually also linked with their other chores that they do. And a women alcohol seller is also a forager who sell vegetables in the market. They also engage in wage work. They also engage in June cultivation, as well as their other social reproductive responsibilities in the household. Uh, so so this actually creates a shows a gender division of labor, and which intensified with the precarity in terms of lack of livelihood avenues in hill districts, and as well as the changing of the land holding patterns also. And at the same time, what as connecting with my core objective of the MPhil research, what I was also looking at is that how this gendered roles of preparation, and along with other chores, it brings to the different meaning making of the landscape itself. For women, it's the hard work that has been reflected in their sharing. They use the word kosto, which actually in Assamese say hard work. They say that their daily work of commuting in the hill to the June, to the forest, to the market area is actually it's actually a hard work. But at the same time, they share that this hard work they've been doing, they feel that with the aspiration that their next generation will have a comfortable life away from this particular difficult terrain or particular difficult landscape. So there I've seen that there is a different kind of a meaning making of the landscape that
Trishita,
happened.
so sorry to
Yeah.
jump in again. Take about a
Yeah.
minute. You finish up the presentation. Thanks.
Yeah, just 1 minute. I'm just
Yep.
finishing up. So next thing is that this kind of which actually reflect a gendered definition of landscape that is being reflected, and which is as like as political ecologist Andrea Nightingale also argues that ecology is an extension of the body as a site of material reproduction and ecological impacts that are maneuvered through everyday activities. And this gendered activities brings a different meaning to the landscape, and where the alcohol preparation also takes a very important part in this meaning making. And along with that, there is a in terms of looking at the broader perspectives across the intersectionality, there is a perception of the landscape of Karbi Anglong and the rural area is like underdeveloped among the villagers, and there is a desire for a dream of development, and there is a perspective of going away from this particular landscape to achieve that dream. And along with that, what I was also trying to bring in is the perspective of how we conceptualize indigenous knowledge practices. In many of the ethnobotanical literature, it becomes like a freezing point. without looking at the changes that happen along the line, along the changes of the political ecology, how indigenous knowledge practices also changes. And I feel I was trying to also depict that how the changes happen when it comes to the her making as a traditional culinary practices.
Trishita,
So
you
yeah.
can clarify that during the question and answer session.
Yeah, sure. I'm so sorry I'm taking a lot of time, but
That's
yeah,
fine.
this is one
Thank
of the
you.
length. Yeah, one of the diagram that I picked in. We can discuss it later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aakrit. Now, next presenter is Sayema Khatun. It is on the policy response to the influx of Rohingya in Bangladesh. The floor is yours, Sayema ji.
Thank you so much. I'm happy and honored to be able to present in this panel. I'm trying to share my screen first. Just hold on a second, please. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Thank you so much. So, hi everyone. My name is Sayema Khatun. I'm a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. The paper I'm going to present is titled as Bare Life, Policy Response to the Influx of Rohingya in Bangladesh. So after the atrocious military crackdown unleashed in Myanmar on August 25, 2017, 724 Rohingya fled to Bangladesh, and more than 43,000 Rohingya parents are reportedly lost, presumably dead in 6 months of the event. UNICEF said the children living in the refugee camp witnessed a hell on earth during and after the crackdown, and aid groups warned of a humanitarian catastrophe in the camps. The unprecedented crisis followed by a massive humanitarian response around the world and an outlandish event Bangladesh had ever experienced after the Liberation War of 1971.
Sayemaji, your slide is not moving.
Okay. Okay, gotcha. So now, is it moving?
Yes, it is.
Okay, gotcha. Got it. Okay. So, Bangladesh, Bangladesh has experienced an outlandish event after Liberation War of 1971, forced her to allow another influx of aid agencies, UN bodies and NGOs for emergency humanitarian operation. As Redfield and Bornstein argues that the recurring drama presented in the international media featured at humanitarian crisis created mediated experience of distant suffering, which activates an intensive complex of interstate entities and non-governmental organizations seeking to supply aid to victims appear to be at play in full scale in the context of Bangladesh. From the very beginning, the humanitarian operation program faced a dilemma, as the government of Bangladesh had not recognized Rohingya refugee according to the international refugee protocol. Instead, had devised a new term called forcibly displaced people as a novel legal status who had entitled to enjoy temporary asylum, protection, and humanitarian aid without claiming the inseparable component of human rights. The global humanitarian governance inconveniently has become to a charm, with the policy of the government accepting suspension of the inalienable rights of man to be able to operate the life-saving emergency aid program. My research problem is to examine the nature of the quickly evolving humanitarian response program scaled up in Bangladesh and its connection to the restoration of human rights of stateless Rohingya refugees living in the Cox's Bazar camps. Does humanitarianism converge or diverge with human rights in this context? What is the interplay between the two ideas, if there are any? How the actors at play at the ground shaping the nature of response and thus yielding any meaningful outcome for Rohingya, including the host community. Taking the intimate connection between human rights and humanitarianism, I am going to explore the evolving policy responding Rohingya refugee crisis getting shaped by state and non-state government connection and the connection of humanitarianism with human rights throughout the policy formulation process. Based on the open-ended qualitative long interviews of the GeoNGO officials, scholars, journalists, and activists involved in the policy-making implementing process conducted in Bangladesh, I have presented a unique situation that has shaped the Rohingya response program. In 1942, citizenship law, Myanmar military government has disfranchised Rohingya, a minority Muslim community of Rakhine State who had been targeted for systemic violence systemic state of sponsored violence over 4 decades and thus become stateless, most persecuted people of the world. The atrocious military crackdown caused a massive wave of Rohingya refugees pouring down to neighboring Bangladesh. UNHCR termed this institutional violence as the textbook case of ethnic cleansing, and others mentioned it as persecution and genocide. The death toll during and after the clearance operation is likely over 10,000 in less than 4 months by a conservative estimate, according to Doctors Without Border and also known as Medical Charity Medicine, MSF. That is way higher than the government estimate of the Myanmar government. More than 34,000 Rohingya was thrown into fire and in the estimation of the International Organization for Migration, 118,000 Rohingya were internally displaced. So now we see distribution of the Rohingya population, a stateless Rohingya population across US, across Asia, where we can see that Bangladesh has more higher population than the country of origin in Myanmar, where Bangladesh is hosting 900,000. Now, in the recent estimate, it is 1.1 million, and whereas in Myanmar, Rohingya population is only 600,000. So this is a map of the southeastern part of Bangladesh, the district of Cox's Bazar, which has border with Myanmar, and where we can see here that during the crisis, on an average, 8,000 Rohingya were entering into Bangladesh when the massive refugee crisis took place in 2017. More than half a million Rohingya took shelter in the bordering district of Bangladesh, fleeing the mass killing, rape, arsenal destruction of their village by the armed forces of the government. When they reach to Bangladesh, men, women, and children have already been reduced to a state of bestialized life, devoid of any belonging or money, had been in a dire need of food, shelter, healthcare, and life-saving essentials. It has been considered as one of the most rapid human exodus since the Rwanda genocide in 1994, which added over 500,000 Rohingya to already existing population taken shelter in the camps of Cox's Bazar. So I will briefly now discuss about my conceptual framework. Stateless people are paradoxically born out of the modern state as the other of imagined community of nation self. This identity emerged within the working system of the state itself, as Hannah Arendt described in her article, Decline of the Nation State. she was curious about the universal acceptance of the supremacy of the will of the nation over all legal and abstract institutions, that it could have been deployed toward a fatal direction. Following the essence of Arden's prediction, I argue the rise of stateless and potential stateless people in the context of South Asia manifest the Benedict Andersonian modular effect of European nation states over the post-colonial modern states. Furthermore, the modern states in South Asia have adopted a neoliberal development approach that the domestic policy within the world system playing in their center-periphery relation. The presence of the transnational organization as the UN bodies, World Bank, IMF, in shaping the nature and future of the state appear to be inevitable reality in tangible and intangible manner. The entangled roles of the transnational development partners and international NGOs are profound and inescapable in foreign investment and aid dependent economy. However, the imagined community of the nation state never imagined the stateless community within or without. Through the working system of nation states, that only the nationals could be citizens, only people of the same nation, national origin could enjoy the full protection of legal institutions, that persons of different nationality would not be treated equally within the nation state, and thus state has turned out to be the instrument of the nation instead of instrument of law. Arden has identified the emergence of two victim groups within the system, stateless and minorities, whose suffering exceeds the other exploited groups. They had been deprived of social status, the possibility to work, right to hold property, even they had lost the rights previously thought of and even defined as inalienable rights of man. The arrival of the stateless people brought to an end of the illusion of establishing rights of man. The arrival of the stateless people brought and even there were other nationalities within their border, they needed to no additional law for them. In a modular manner, the nationalization of Rohingya and production of a stateless population has become the product of an inherent consistency of post-colonial nation states. Statelessness is fundamentally a problem created by the sovereign state and outcome of the notion of state security, ignoring the well-being of and security of the individual community of the states. As in Bangladesh, when it's providing a provisional asylum, they continue to remain the Rohingya remains stateless in the host country of Bangladesh for indefinite period of time, deprived of right to have rights as Arden articulated. Rohingya camp life begins and continues in limbo, bearing the unmanifested hope of repatriation to Myanmar and in constant fear of local integration and assimilation. They represent one of the fragments of nation states formed by Partha Chatterjee. Rohingya, like the post-war Europe's stateless minorities, neither have any government to represent nor any legal structure to protect them, and therefore have been forced to live under a condition of absolute lawlessness. These sound like a sheer manifestance of Arden's prediction. Denationalization of Rohingya has become constitutionalized by totalitarian politics of Myanmar and henceforth made possible for the government to persecute a whole community, capturing, manipulating, and using the state apparatus with the support of the Theravada Buddhist monastery and a profound influence of the extremist Islamophobic monks. An ethnic minority within a few decades, through the policy of the regime, desperately crossing the border of every possible direction, moved toward the destiny of the unidentifiable paupers without nationality, money, property, and passport. The intensity of this viciousness has reached to its highest magnitude through Myanmar's transition to democracy as a sovereign state. It has become self-evident that elements of national constitution do not comply with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Therefore, national sovereignty and the national sovereignty and the universal human rights come to a conflict in Myanmar. Rohingya have been treated in the way being singled out as a scum of the earth at the first place, as the Jew and Trotskyite had been in Europe. Mass nationalization of wholesale population forced them out of their village, their country, arriving at refugee to the unwilling host countries. Nevertheless, remain undeportable, as there is no country on earth in which they can enjoy the rights to have rights. So, Agamben's analysis of production of bare life within the paradoxical relation of sovereign power is enormously important for understanding Rohingya's state of life, focusing on the concentration camp as the exemplary place of modern biopolitics, which can be considered analogous with Rohingya camp in our field situations, such as Nomo Basileus embody a fundamental ambiguity, being a permanent and visible localization for denationalized zone for inherently indefinite location. Agamben hypothesized that biopower is really a power over the produced bare life that finds its origin not in life itself, but in the sovereignty of law. It can be even stated that production of biopolitical body is original activity of sovereign power. Agamben states that inclusion of the basis of violence in the states of exception. The Holocaust, for example, was possible for exclusion of the Jew from the German state and the mainstream culture, and thus it reduced them into a bare life. Extending this understanding, I proceed further to investigate the state of Rohingya refugees living in the camps of the host country. So now my research question is to examine the nature of the quickly evolving policy and the nature of the emerging humanitarian response program scaled up in Bangladesh and its connection to the restoration of human rights of stateless Rohingya refugees living in the camps. So my research question is how the policy formulated to respond to Rohingya refugee crisis evolved locally and globally for effective meaningful resolution of humanitarian disaster and its connection to the restoration of human rights. Now I will discuss about my research method and fieldwork. I have traveled to Bangladesh for my field visit, conducted a short ethnographic field research, mostly in Dhaka, and visited Cox's Bazar local operation offices as well during summer 2018. My interlocutors include the individuals within the government, NGOs, UN bodies, media outlets, civil society, intelligentsia, public opinion leaders, and diplomats, had conversation with 42 people. I have attended a number of conferences, workshops, and public events as my data collection technique and conducted archival research. So these are some pictures from my field I have taken during my fieldwork in Cox's Bazar. In the absence of the national refugee policy framework, Bangladesh did not grant refugees status and recognize them as refugees. Instead, coined a novel term as forcibly displaced Myanmar national. Nevertheless, number of national laws and provisions exist in the constitutions cover all persons on the territory, such as the 1946 Foreigners Act, which regulates the government and govern the presence of refugees. Under this legal structure, the government has provided provisional protection of the refugee or FBMN through administrative mechanism, whereas United Nations High Commission of Refugee engaging with the government have continuing recognizing them as refugee and proves provide their service according under its own mandate and institutional protocol. So emergency response and forces of compassion. For more than we have experienced in the situation of Bangladesh, that forces of compassion has become activated, responding to the emergency situation. If we go back a little bit about historical context, more than 4 decades, Bangladesh has been dealing with the Rohingya refugee crisis amidst its own resource constraint, which generated conflicting and controversial arguments and debate, both in popular as well as scholarly policy conversation, as the long-standing refugee recipient host country within its legal landscape. Bangladesh demonstrated a unique response under an overarching umbrella of humanitarianism within ambiguously acknowledging of the right to have right of the Rohingya refugee. Bangladesh has not ratified the International Statelessness Convention and other conventions for protection of the refugee. Neither she became a state party of the International Refugee Protocol of 1967. In absence of the provision of the refugee in the national legislature, Bangladesh has devised different legal status, as I have mentioned, FBMN, that has not approved the human right of the Rohingya population. In the week before Eid al-Adha, I got the description from my respondents that the second big religious festival was taking place, that was for Muslim, that is a Muslim festival in Bangladesh. Rohingya began to penetrate the Myanmar-Bangladesh border, crossing Naf River from the Shahpuri Deep port of entry and other entry points as complete shock and awe to the local people. It started with 10-20 people in the boat, and then kept on escalating into hundreds and thousands, and then as a moving sea of devastated bodies coming both by boat and on foot. This island is an important landing post for the boat loads of Rohingya refugees crossing the river to reach Bangladesh. A Tabligh Jamaat event, a traditional Muslim religious congregation, was in progress in the mosque that week next to Shahpuri Deep of Teknaf in Cox's Bazar, according to a witness. The attendees spontaneously jumped into the rescue operation, providing food and life-saving essentials.
Sayema, so take about 2 more minutes to wrap up the presentation, please.
Sure. According to with live broadcast of horrific footage of the tragic exodus, international media personnel and humanitarian agencies crowded Cox's Bazar, rapidly transformed the small, sleepy tourist town into a busy global hub of the largest humanitarian response program. My interlocutor recalled working day and night 24/7 at the ground. The government allowed another influx of INGOs, more than 130, restricting 41 UN bodies and other NGOs engaged with the government, laid out a joint response plan and forming intersectoral coordination group. The first and foremost pressing demand was immediate and urgent life-saving programs for food, shelter, healthcare, and daily essentials. Within 2 months, international donor community mobilized more than $344 million to scale up critical humanitarian assistance that affect host communities of Bangladesh. So now we see that the discrepancy between compassion and versus rights. Bangladesh government adopted a radically reverse policy than before to allow all the Rohingya to temporarily stay and provide protection, forming a task force to monitor and operate the response program engaged with transnational body, having them establish their humanitarian presence, but they haven't granted the basic human rights according to the international standard. So in conclusion, the graphic narratives of apocalyptic exodus of Rohingya to Bangladesh and wide broadcast of the dramatic unfolding of human sufferings at the border summoned the forces of compassion from the local and global spectrum. As Redfield and Bornstein argue, that the recurring dramas presented in the international media referred as humanitarian crisis creates mediated experience of distant suffering, which activate an extensive complex of interstate entities and non-governmental organizations seeking to supply aid to victims appear to be at play in full scale in Bangladesh. The humanitarian impulse and effort to intervene had been produced by both local and international humanitarian agents, opening the floodgate of aid and humanitarian assistance for the Rohingya that called upon an influx of NGOs in Bangladesh, in Cox's Bazar. The central dilemma of the Rohingya emergency crisis is facing a historical, long drawn-out, complex problem with a short-term immediate humanitarian response program without actually facing the magnitude and extent of it. Formation of institutional structure has seemingly replaced the organic vernacular humanitarian agency. The organic vernacular humanitarianism, having both religious and secular approach, have been subsided as IGC has been established and UN cluster system introduced for camp management. Discussing the relation of humanitarianism and aid world, Redfield and Bornstein maintain that advocates of humanitarianism, development, and human rights all broadly seek to ameliorate and improve aspects of human condition. Seemingly, the global humanitarian agencies have come to a consensus regarding withholding the question of human rights of Rohingya to make the emergency assistance possible from the very beginning, accepting the non-refugee status coming in terms of the Bangladesh with the government of Bangladesh. Forces of compassion remain inactive and almost silent while encountering the issue of restoration of rights to have right for the refugees. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you for your patient hearing. I'm available for any question, and I appreciate any.
Yeah. Thank you. Very nice presentation. Aakrit, do we have time for the questions?
Yes, so thank you both of you for the presentation. It was excellent. We have about 4 minutes for general questions and answers. So there's already a couple of questions posted in the chat box. So if you would like to expand on it, one of them is from Dr. Bohara. So I think it relates to Trishita's work, which is in Nepalese hill communities, alcohol production is usually in the domain of women as well. It gives them some sort of economic power, like in terms of cash incentives. Is there something similar there with your work?
Can I respond?
Yes, please.
Thank you for the question. So yeah, definitely, even among the Karbi, even in the Karbi community, Karbi women plays it's the domain of the Karbi women in terms of alcohol production. But I can speak from the field area where I did my field work. One of the relatively new trend that has been coming. So in terms of the customary law, customary rules and norms, actually initially men are not even like allowed to touch the utensil and ingredients also according to the customary rule. But what happened that now they have started engaging in the whole production practice because it's like more commercialized one. And along with that, what has been shared by many women seller is that how the decision making most of the time is been done in a community meeting. Say, as I was mentioning about the Rohingya festival, which is an annual festival where they also organize an annual meeting for decision making for the whole village for the different sort of things, where they also because like a commercialization of a lot of things like forage vegetables and stuff like that is very pertinent livelihood sources. So they decide upon the prices. So they also decide upon the HOR prices, and which this particular this is a particular customary meeting which actually attended by men. So those kind of trend is being noticed, even if it was traditionally a domain of women. I was noticing some kind of a changing of the chain.
Okay, yep, that sounds good to me. The other question on the chat box was from Dr. Bhattarai. Dr. Bhattarai, would you love to ask that? Dr. Bhattarai? So I think one of the questions you asked on the chat box was Sahima's research project.
Aakrit, I think it's also the end of like the session. I mean, we all are out of time, so we might want to conclude it here.
Yep, that sounds good to me. So thank you again for the presentation. Both of them are really interesting. I think we're gonna have about 5 minutes break, right, Disha? And then
there's no break here. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Sakib after that, and he's going to give some closing remarks. And after that, we'll have a small networking session. So those who can stay, they're welcome to stay. It's optional.
Thank you, Disha. I just wanted to add a few lines here, and regarding our HPRC second graduate panel. I really liked the diversified topics presentation, and from not only from India, Bangladesh, Nepal, and also a few papers from USA. So that's wonderful. And I want everybody here, like the presenters, to convey my thanks. And you can utilize our platform to build network, not only the fellow presenters, but also with us. And I want to thank especially our organizers here, Dr. Disha Shende and Dr. Vinish Shrestha, for taking the initiative and to make sure that we come up with a plan for this program, and we can organize this event in a very professional manner, and which I think went really well in terms of that aspect. And I want to also thank the other folks behind the scene, especially Doctors Mandy Liu, Mohammad Mashiur Rahman, Soumyajit Chakraborty for your help, and Aakrit as well. So without taking much time, on behalf of the HPRC committee, I want to conclude over here. So we are looking forward to our networking session, as Disha was mentioning, Dr. Disha Shende was mentioning. So, whoever has time, you can stay with us, and we can, try to address any questions or you have or concern. Please go ahead. So thank you, everybody.